Okay, welcome everybody to the class, Parsha discussion class, as I like to call it, because I do want to invite any questions, comments, any clarifications, and any ideas of your own that you want to share. Uh, that is absolutely part of the way we learn. If you can't ask questions, the Talmud tells us, then you are not able to learn. You have to be able to ask. And that's we do not have we are the one religion that does not have vows of silence. We're all about asking and debating, and that's good. That's part of how we get to the truth. That's actually going to be one of the themes in this week's Parsha. This Parsha is called Shoftim, which literally means judges, and it starts off with the law that there have to be courts. There has to be a system of justice. Justice doesn't just naturally come normally and naturally, organically for societies. We know there are plenty of unjust societies in the world. Even those with courts aren't necessarily just. In some countries in the world, to this day, if somebody's caught stealing, they lose their hand. What did they steal? Was it worth a hand? Was it, and was it anywhere near fair justice? There's was that American in Indonesia? Or was it a few years already, probably a few decades ago, who got caned for spitting gum onto the street? Right. So justice is not always just. It's a little extreme sometimes. People get killed for saying the wrong things in some countries. I'm from Russia. Well, we there was several decades of people being sent to gulags for disagreeing with a leading political party. That's not normal. That's not fair. That's not just. Killing people and their families, for unpopular opinions is not exactly the idea of justice. So justice has to be enforced and has to be just and has to be objective. And that's part of the theme of the famous verse Tzedek Tzedek Tirdof, which is in the Parsha, which means justice, justice you shall pursue, which is actually, as many of you might know, it's right there in the front of the hall of the Supreme Court of the United States. That line from this week's Parsha, and that's the beginning of the Parsha. Let's That's not the only thing that's in this week's parsha. We have laws of kings and laws of rebellious sages. We'll talk about some of these things as it comes up. But let's go a little deeper dive into some of the verses themselves. See if we can the source sheet that I sent out earlier by email or by text. You should have. Either way, it's here in front of you now if you're on the screen. So, Devarim, chapter 16, verses 21 and 22. There's an interesting verse, just seems completely out of ordinary. And it says, Lo tital lecha asherah kol eitz etzel mizbeach. You're not supposed to have an Asherah tree. Asherah was a goddess worshipped in the Canaanite cultures, in the ancient Israelite lands, by mostly by non-Jews. And actually, I read at least one archaeologist, probably a group of archaeologists by now, claim that Asherah was God's consort. So like Hashem's, female version, whatever. So that's obviously for us that's ridiculous. Hashem has no need for a consort or a female. He's not male himself. There's no such thing. He doesn't need an opposite. That's what the Shema represents. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hashem is unique and one, and there's no need for a second for any part. He's not missing anything. So, as opposed to us, who we have the need for a pair to complete us. But we're not supposed to build this kind of tree. You're not supposed to worship this tree next to the altar of Hashem, Elokecha, Asher Taseh Lach, that Hashem, that you are supposed to make. You're supposed to make a mizbeach for Hashem.
Just quibbling on the English.
Yeah.
When it says pole.
Yeah. So that's their translation. Right. So that's their translation. So that might be their translation, or there might be an opinion like that an Asherah was put on a pole. But I think the way Chazal, the Talmud definitely talks about it, is the Asherah was a tree that was worshipped, an actual tree. Not exactly not the Viking Yggdrasil type idea. If you're familiar with how the Vikings thought they'd get to Valhalla, and there's this major tree that's really the god of everything. Okay. Anyway, the Vikings had their own religion. Anyway, so that has nothing to do with this. The Asherah was a tree that was worshipped. And it was sort of like the goddess of nature. It's very similar to the idea of like the earth goddess that is almost universal in many religions. If you've studied other religions, the whole like Mother Earth type idea that it's still celebrated even in America, in secular America, with Earth Day, right? It still exists. This idea of that nature is a kind of God in and of itself. And specifically, actually, usually, as far as I know, as far as I know, always, there might be exceptions, but always feminine, by the way. It's never Father Earth. It's always Mother Earth. It's a female sort of holiday. And there's probably, there's something probably Kabbalistic about that as well. There's definitely something to the idea that there's the field, the fecundity, the ability to grow things. That's probably something that is feminine in nature. But anyway, so that was the whole Asherah thing. And then aside from a lo takin lecha matzeiva asher saneh Hashem elokecha, but don't build, whatever you do, don't build a matzeiva. A mizbeach you should build an altar in which you're going to make sacrifices. That's great, but don't build a matzeiva. What's that? Asher saneh Hashem elokecha. Hashem hates. It's a big word, right? It's a strong word. He hates this matzeiva, this pillar. So an altar's fine, a pillar's not. So first of all, what's the difference? And then we might want to deal with the question of why does Hashem hate these things? All right. So we're gonna break into the commentaries. The next source we have is Rashi. So Rashi is, and you're gonna hear me say this a lot or if you haven't heard this a lot already, you'll hear it a lot in the future. Rashi is the father of all commentaries. Not that he's the oldest. There was plenty of commentary before Rashi. Rashi was a French rabbi living about 1,000 years ago, and he, more than anything else, more than writing a commentary, what he really did was he edited a commentary. He took from the existing sources, and very little of it comes from him directly. Almost all of his commentary is the commentary of the Talmud, of the Midrash, and he picks and chooses the ones that he felt explained the text in the simplest way, what he called the pashut pshat, the simple explanation. And so that was his goal. So here he is, just as an example. He quotes this thing, lo takim lecha matzeiva, don't build a matzeiva. What's a matzeiva? Matzevet even achat hikriv alacha afilu l'shamayim. Don't make a matzeiva. So what's a matzeiva? This thing that Hashem hates. Don't make a matzeiva. Matzeiva is a one stone altar, as opposed to a mizbeach, which is a multi-stone altar. So you put stones together, combine them together, stick them together, pile them up. That's a mizbeach. That's great. One giant rock, one big boulder, and using that as an altar, Hashem hates that for some reason. So let's see the next Rashi. Hashem hates this thing, this asher saneh that he hates, mizbeach avani mizbeach adama tziva la'asot. He says you should make an altar of stones, an altar of earth. There's again piles of earth and stone together. However, what does he hate? That zo saneh, but this he hates. Ki chok haita laknanim. This is what the Canaanim would use. They would not make a mizbeach out of multiple stones. They would use one giant boulder, and he hates it because the Canaanim did it. So we shouldn't do what the Canaanim do. And more than that, he points out, afal pi, even though shahaita ahuva lo b'meha avot. He seemed to have loved these things in the time of our forefathers. There's Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. There are verses that talk about how they made this matzeiva. They used this. They too worshipped Hashem by sacrificing an animal or whatever on this one boulder projection. Achshav, but now that we have the Torah, now he hates them because this is used for avodah zarah. So why does he hate this so much? Rashi didn't really address that. And of course, Rashi wouldn't, because what did I say before? I said Rashi likes to, or his goal is to give us the simple explanation. Simple explanation is he hates it. He hates it because the Canaanim do it. Well, our forefathers did it. Seemed okay for Avraham. Yitzchak, Yaakov, they did it. Hashem didn't hate it then. Does Hashem change his mind? What's happening? So for that, we're going to go to our next source. Our next source is Rav Samson Raphael Hirsch, rabbi in Germany, passed away in 1888. He was most prolific probably about 50 years earlier. Wrote a commentary on the Torah, on the Tehillim, wrote a lot of articles, had his own newspaper. He's a fascinating personality. Worth a biography. There are biographies about him. But he says, and by the way, most of his commentary focuses on language. So he learns out lessons, usually ethical lessons, from the language itself. So matzeiva consists of a single stone. We know that. Rashi told us that. Mizbech is an elevation made of many stones. By the way, this is a commentary not here, not on this verse. This is his commentary in Bereshit, where Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, our forefathers, were making these matzeivot, right? So here's what's interesting. It's fascinating. Matzeiva is presented by nature. What made this boulder? Not you, not me. No human being made the boulder. The boulder is made by nature, right? Mizbeach is made by man. Before Matan Torah, before the Torah was given, God's providence revealed itself primarily in the ways of nature and in the destiny of man. There's nature, the creation, Bereshit. That's what it was all about. Hashem made the world. That's where you see Hashem. You see Hashem in nature. That is to say, in what man received from God. Correspondingly, a matzeiva is a stone taken from creation to commemorate a divine deed. After Matan Torah, Hashem wished to be revealed not in what He bestowed upon man, but in what man does with this blessing. And from after the Torah was given, the most important thing that Hashem wants us to focus on is what human beings can do. Now that we have the Torah, what can we do with it? How great can we be? And that's when the Mizbeach takes the front seat. Right? Because the Mizbeach is made by man. It's a pile of stones put together by somebody, by mankind. And that's the purpose of the law giving. That's why the Torah was even given. Man's deeds are to attest to God's glory. Hence, after the law giving, the Mizbeach matzeiva was prohibited. And he quotes our verse here, 1622. So that I think that puts it all together into a completely different perspective. And I think, and this is not something he says, but I think it's just something that almost becomes obvious. What did I say the whole Parsha is about? It's called Shoftim. It's about judges. It's about laws. It's about courts. Who does that? Nature? No. Nature, as we said before, will not create a court. Mankind, men, human beings make a court. We make justice happen. And that's a great place. That's perhaps is why our Parsha starts off with the seemingly random law of matzeivot versus mizbechot, and so it's not so random after all. It's giving us a theme that we're going to carry through the rest of the parsha.
Won't it apply specifically to a certain kind of matzeiva? Because at least today we use matzeiva for gravestone.
But that's a word we use, yeah. But we don't worship on a matzeiva, right? So a matzeiva is a slab, yeah. Technically. Yeah, so it's a boulder. You can use a boulder, and you can make it into something holy. You can have it could be the cornerstone of something else. But again, even that is worked on. It's even when we use it as a gravestone, we don't just leave it. We write on it, right? We engrave it. We do something. A human participates somehow in that creation. So that might be something different as well. Yes. Okay. We're going to skip to chapter 17, verse 11. And like I said, we're going to deal now with some of the laws of a court. And the question that I think we're going to see be answered here is a very important question that you might have on your own, or you might hear other people ask, especially if they know that you are either Orthodox or Orthodox adjacent. They might ask you questions like, you follow halacha, you follow Jewish law. That's what halacha usually is translated as, Jewish law. It really means a method, a path. Okay. Anyway, let's call it Jewish law for lack of a better word. And then the question is, how is halacha developed? How does it happen? So first of all, we need to know that there is no, in the Catholic world, there's a college of cardinals that choose based on popularity, based on what kind of impact he might have on the church. They're the ones who pick the Pope, right? The current Pope is American, right? It was a big deal. It was the first American Pope, right? So that was chosen by a vote. Some people probably voted against him, by the way. I don't know. That's it's a secret vote. Like they blow some red smoke up some chimney, and then all of a sudden they know who the next pope is going to be. All right, we don't have anything like that in Torah Judaism. We don't have. Nobody becomes the grand rabbi by a vote. Right? It always happens by word of mouth, by a reputation, and by the person proving themselves, usually with their two things, with their scholarship and their kindness, really, when it comes down to their tzidkut, their how righteous they are. And by having that kind of reputation, people will ask them questions naturally, and eventually they ask them enough questions that they'll have to eventually publish a book, where they've answered a lot of these questions based on their studies and based on their opinions. And that's how halacha is usually developed. But that didn't used to be the case. It used to be, well, let me give you an example. Our source here is a Gemara in Bava Batra, 82b. And there's a story there. There was a town called Salmon, might still exist, where a person planted a vineyard that was 16 by 16 amot. So measurement in amma is about 2 feet, so it's 32 by 32 feet. Okay. Anyway, then he would turn the branches of 2 rows or facing each other to one side, so that there was space of 16 cubits between the 2 rows, and then sow clearing in between. The following year, he would turn the branches that were sown the previous year, and then he would be, and then the uncultivated part during the next year. In other words, he would rotate his crops that way. And that incident came before the sages, and they permitted it. And what does that show you? It shows you that this measurement of the 16 cubits, 32 feet approximately, squared, between plants is required for them to be considered separate units. That's the definition of separate units, is 16 cubits. That's what makes it separate. Rav Yosef said to him, the Gemara says, I don't know, I'm not sure about that, because there's another similar incident with there's a sale of trees in another village, there were shepherds, etc. There's a whole story, and he's not sure if he agrees with this idea. And then he argues, Maybe 4 cubits is enough. Maybe it doesn't have to be 16 cubits to make this definition. That's what the Talmud is mostly about, by the way, coming up with definitions, measurements. What is this thing? How do you define it? So in the end, the Gemara concludes, after the whole discussion back and forth, afilu hachi maaseh adif. The masa, the story that we said about this village in what do we call it, Salmon. This is actually where the halacha comes from. In other words, halacha comes from stories and not from theory. Another way of saying that is that when you have, say, 2 books that might argue about a particular halacha, one is arguing on like a theoretical level, like some professor wrote it, even a observant, halacha abiding professor wrote a theoretical book about a halacha, and you have another book that was written by a rabbi who, for instance, answers questions on a regular basis, a rav of a town, and he comes up with some other idea that's opposite of that. Which one is stronger? So according to this Gemara, seems that the stronger opinion would be that of the practical rabbi who's answering these questions. What we call in halachic literature, shailot and tshuvot. So questions and answers. Questions and answers have more authority, in other words, than a theoretical book. And the Maharal says that specifically. He says explicitly that a tshuva written on a practical question is more reliable than an essay written for academic reasons. That makes sense? Based on this. The Noda Behud explains why that's true. Why is that true? Now, you would think, by the way, there is reason to think that the professor's theoretical essay is better. And I'll tell you why. Where is he writing? In calm, collected, might have his coffee in his one hand, listening to Beethoven in the background. You know, there's no stress, there's no urgency. He can calmly collect all of his books. He's at a university, perhaps. He's got a giant library at his disposal. Right? Everything's at his fingertips. Maybe he has an assistant who double checks his stuff. Right? It's possible to think that a professor like that might get the correct halacha better. And in fact, that's not the case. The boots on the ground rabbi who might be overwhelmed with everything else that's going on, he might be getting questions left and right from all over the world, and he doesn't have a giant library, and he doesn't have time for research, and he doesn't have time for his coffee's already gotten cold. He does his Beethoven CD is broken already. All right, so he might be harassed by all these questions, but he's going to get the right answer. Why? Says the Noda Behuda, because he prays on a regular basis for siyata d'shemaya. Siyata d'shemaya is something that is rarely talked about, but it's an important thing. It's Aramaic for help from heaven. A rabbi isn't just answering a question based on his genius. A rabbi is answering a question that sometimes comes to him. The answer comes to him from a heavenly source. Of course, we can't just rely on a heavenly source, but based on his attempt to get the correct answer and his research and his learning and then all of that comes together, and Hashem blesses him with the correct answer. Now, his halacha really does come in the end from Hashem. The Be'er Mayim Chaim explains. He says that not every Rav and Posek should actually be praying for such a thing, as we said before. Not only that he gives the correct answer, but that nothing incorrect should ever occur based on what he says. And he gives a story to illustrate this. It's a true story. I'm not sure if this is something that happened to him or if this has happened to another rabbi. A rabbi, and this is a common thing that used to happen in Europe until about 100 years ago or so. A rabbi was approached by somebody in the community with a piece of a chicken leg, say. And the question was whether this chicken leg is from a treifa. What's a treifa? that treifa doesn't mean not kosher. It does. That's how we usually use that word nowadays. Treifa literally means that there's some sort of internal injury in the animal that will make it so that it cannot survive the rest until for the next 12 months. It's not gonna live out the year. So that's what a treifa really means. So usually you'd be able to tell if there's like something wrong with the lungs or whatever. So here there's no lungs involved, right? There's just the chicken leg, and sometimes there's a blood clot or whatever that could also create that sort of situation. So this person brought the rabbi the chicken leg, and the rabbi saw no problem with the chicken leg, not a treifa at all. And then on a whim, he did something that he never ever does. He asked to see the rest of the chicken, and the rest of the chicken was brought to him, and he examined that, and that did have a treifa. That I don't know. Again, the lungs, the this, the that. I don't know what was wrong with the chicken itself. It missed its head. Whatever. So, that shouldn't have a head by then. But whatever it was, right? Whatever it was, there was something wrong with the chicken. And the point is that this rabbi had siyata d'shmaya. Hashem helped him find that there was something wrong with the chicken, even though there wasn't anything wrong with the piece he was really looking at. You understand? So that kind of thing happens, and that's why we have this halacha that's in our source here, where it says that when you ask a question in chapter 17, verse 11, al pi haTorah asher yerucha, based on the Torah that you inherit, v'al hamishpat asher yomru lecha, and based on the law that they tell you, lo tasur min hadavar asher yegidu lecha, and you should not turn from the way that they tell you, yamin usmol, not to the left and not to the right. This is our source for halacha today. If anybody says, oh, the rabbis are just rabbis, they're just human beings, they make mistakes, first of all, that's true. Rabbis do make mistakes. They are human beings. But they can be checked by other people. There is a system of checks and balances. If a rabbi says something that's wrong, another rabbi will hopefully correct them or whatever, or congregants will note something, and then they can respond. And either they're right or they're wrong. But and that's okay to do as long as it's done respectfully. A rabbi should be questioned if you're not sure about a course of action. That's fine. But why is the rabbi right? Because of this, because he's given siyata d'shmaya. In the end, right, we have to have sources to go to for halachic ideas, and it can't be just our own opinion. It's not halacha is not, as we said about justice in general. Halacha is not organic. Halacha is not subjective. Halacha has to be dealt with correctly. The very next verses, chapter 17, verses 12 and 13. Ha'ish asher yaseh b'zadon leviti shemoa el hakohen. If somebody disregards the law with the kohen, with the priest, v'amod l'sheret sham et Hashem alakecha o al hashofet, and then he disregards what Hashem told him or what the judge told him, umeit ha'ishahu, that man should die, va'arta haram Yisrael, and the evil should be taken out of Israel. So we're going to find out who this man is in just a moment. Right? This evil man. He's so evil. The language is so strict. He should be killed. He should be taken out. And then, based on this, the next verse says, ha'am yishma'u v'yirau, the whole nation will hear and see, v'lo yizidun od, and they will not rebel anymore.
But didn't we have to, at least, when we had and going to have the temple, if a judgment was in error, there was a sacrificial system. Mm-hmm. So we know that mistakes were made.
Yes, there's an entire Gemara about that. There's an entire tractate called Horiot about mistakes that the courts made. Yes, courts definitely made mistakes. They admitted it, and there were times when they had to bring this sacrifice that you're talking about. That's absolutely correct. One of the ways that these mistakes would happen is mentioned in the Gemara that we're about to see in Sanhedrin. There's a Gemara in Sanhedrin, 88a. Where it talks about uh, about a rebellious elder. What's called zaken mamre. So what's a rebellious elder? So just in short, a zaken mamre is a member of the court. So every major city in Israel is supposed to have a court of 23. And they can deal with all kinds of legal cases, even capital cases.
So when you say Israel
Is,
today,
no, not Israel today. Is Eretz Israel of ancient times and God willing soon future times. There's supposed to be a religious court in every major city, and they're supposed to be able to deal and dole out punishments and laws based on their discussions. And there's all kinds of rules about they're not supposed to give capital punishments. They can't give capital punishments on the same day that the trial started. They have to deliberate at least overnight before they give their answer, which is one of the reasons they can't start these cases on, say, a Thursday, because then if they go overnight on Thursday to give a death penalty, right, on Friday, then they'd have to enact the death penalty on Shabbat, which is a big problem. So there are all kinds of rules about how they had to work. Now, if a member of a court, if the court decided by majority rule, let's say they decided, let's find something innocuous enough that we can mention. They decided that for Shabbat, cholent has to have beans. Has to. If it doesn't have beans, it's not cholent. They made such a rule. Okay. And this guy disagrees. He says, "No, I'm okay. I don't want to have beans in my cholent. I still want to call it cholent." He disagrees with the court. What is he supposed to do? He cannot teach and paskin that before he goes first to the superior court, the Supreme Court in Israel, which sat in the Lishkat Hagazit, in the chamber of hewn stone in Yerushalayim, right inside, basically inside the temple courtyard. And he would argue his case to them, and then they would respond either based on logic or based on a tradition, whether they agree with him or not. And he had to accept their ruling. If he did not accept their ruling, and he came back and taught his ruling as opposed to the Supreme Court's ruling, he becomes what our verse just talked about, this zaken mamre, this rebellious elder, right? Not if he doesn't do it, by the way. In other words, if he goes home and in his own home he makes cholent without beans or whatever, right? He still did not break the halacha. Yeah. He's not a zaken mamre. He's not a rebellious elder. But if he goes back home and teaches people his opinion that it can still be cholent and not have beans in it, or whatever, right? So that makes him this rebellious elder, and that's what we have there in the Gemara with another example there. But the point is, the question really should be brewing is, why is the Torah so strict about this? What's the big deal? He's just one rebellious elder. He's just teaching halacha differently than everybody else. Is it really that? Okay, it's maybe not nice. Maybe it goes against the court, but is it gonna destroy anything? And says the Meshech Chochmah, absolutely. It's going to destroy the very fabric of Judaism. You'll have multiple Judaisms. Right? Every little community will have their own halacha. So, and you'll something silly like cholent, okay? Even something silly like cholent will have different definitions. You'll go into a restaurant, you'll ask for cholent, and they'll bring you a lentil stew. You'll say, that's not a cholent. It's what we call cholent in our town. My Rebbe taught me that this is the halacha, that this is cholent. And you'll go to another place, and it's you'll get salmon with paprika on it, and they call that cholent. Everything's a cholent, and the whole world is a cholent. And then you've destroyed the definition of things. And once you destroy definitions of things, as lahavdil, as George Orwell taught us, once you play around with words and language enough, you can say whatever you want and mean whatever you want. And then you have no definitions of anything anymore. And that's what you see, by the way, without getting too political. That's what you see in the outside world right now. Things like justice, things like genocide can mean completely different things than what they actually supposed to mean. Clearing out from the river to the sea, that's not genocide for some reason all of a sudden, even though and that seems to be what, you would think that that's what they mean when they say that. They don't want a group of people to be living between the river and the sea. Whatever. I guess that's not, that's somehow not genocide, but, a war where people die and there is starvation, that for some reason is genocide. I think I saw a statistic that if Israel continues its current policies in Gaza, then it'll take something like 400 years for them to eradicate all the Muslims.
I feel the way that population is.
Besides that their population is increasing. If the current policy of this mass starvation continues, it'll take 400 years. That's the worst genocide in the history of mankind. Right? That's longer than the age of the United States right now. It's unbelievable. Just like statistically speaking. Anyhow. So aside from everything else, again, language is important, definitions are important, and definitions are what halacha is. Halacha is defining what things are. 16 meters, whatever it is, whatever the distance is, that's the definition.
Well, what about these situations where some people are stricter than others?
Mm-hmm.
You'll get one group who won't eat that sort of meat because.
Yeah. Okay. So what you're talking about is called astringency.
Yeah.
And it's important in those situations. A great question. Thank you for bringing it up. So when people have stringencies, it's important to know that those are stringencies. That's not the halacha.
Yeah.
And that's important. Now, we have people, for example, right now in San Diego, we have a lot of people who are visiting from other towns where they might have stringencies. They have all kinds of different, stringencies. When they travel, they should know what the law is, so they can keep the law and not have to throw everything out the window just because they can't get their stringencies, right? Somebody wants, I don't know, Satmar slaughtered meat. Well, in San Diego, you're not going to find Satmar hechsher on meat. Does that make it bad? Does it make it good? That's not the point. The point is that if you're looking for that particular unique stringency, that niche market, then you're not going to get it here, and you need to know that that's not something you have to have necessarily, unless you feel that it is, and then you're stuck eating wafers for your stay here. Whatever it is, everybody's got their own picadillos. All right, so let's skip quite a bit to basically towards the end of the Parsha, chapter 20, verse 8. Chapter 20, verse 8 now gets into the laws of war. Eventually, the Torah is going to talk about even laws of, you're supposed to, we have a rule that there's different kinds of war. There's what's called a malchemet reshut and a malchemet mitzvah, which means there's different laws governing whether the war is more or less voluntary versus a mitzvah war. What I mean is that there are times when the Torah says Hashem wants us to attack a certain nation because there would be an evil influence upon us, so we have to fight them. And there's other times when it's just we need to attack them for security purposes or whatever, and not necessarily for life and death situations. It might not be a mitzvah war. In those cases, we also have to sometimes have an overture of peace. When there's a war, that's especially a war of reshut, and you want access to a river, let's say, and that river is going to help the economy of the country enough that you can have, in theory, you can have a war with those people. But before you do, there's a halacha. You're supposed to approach them in peace first. Say, please let us have this amount of land. We'll let you live. We don't want to attack you. We don't want to fight you. You'll have land. We'll have land. You'll have access to the river. We'll have access to the river. Something like that. You're supposed to always do that.
You mean like Israel in the, what was it, I think in the 50s with the sources of Jordan?
I wasn't thinking that at the time, but again, and
When they wanted to shut off the...
right. So yeah, something like that. Something like that. But again, Israel doesn't always get its battle strategies from the Torah. To say it nicely, it doesn't always follow halacha. But yeah, something to that effect. Something to that effect. Ancient Israel with a king and everything, and that's also some of the laws we have in this parsha. There's supposed to be a king, and he's supposed to lead the people and keep halacha and etc. Aside from all that, at one point when they're gathering the soldiers before the war, the soldiers have a chance to leave. There's the differences of opinion about what exactly happens, but the commander of the army makes an announcement. If anybody has built a house and hasn't lived in it yet, you're allowed to leave. If anybody's married a woman and have not slept with her yet, you're allowed to leave. If anybody has, and gives a series of exceptions like that for people to be able to leave. And then the Torah says this phrase here. V'yasfu, and this is chapter 20, verse 8. V'yasfu hashotrim ledaber el ha'am. This officer continues to speak to the nation, to the soldiers. V'amru, and he says, Mi ha'ish hayare, any man who is afraid, v'rach alevav, and his heart is weak, yelech, you can go. V'yashuv lebeito, go back to your home. V'lo yimas et levav echav bilvavo, and don't discourage your fellow soldiers to be like your heart. Don't turn their hearts like your heart. In other words, if you've got somebody who's scared and worried and everything else, all the other soldiers around that person are going to feel equally scared and jittery and not confident. We're supposed to go into war confidently. So why are we listing this group of people now? So let's look at Rashi very quickly. Again, the father of all commentaries. V'yavi urach levav. This phrase, he says, Rabbi Akiva Omer, kishma'o, mashma'o. This means just take the words literally. In other words, if you're scared, get out of the way of, like I just explained. If you're scared because of battle, go. It's not possible for this person to be in the heat of battle. He's afraid. He's gonna freeze up. He's not gonna be able to survive, and he's gonna make other people less confident also. So that's the opinion of Rabbi Akiva of what this phrase means. Simple, basic, black and white explanation, right? Comes along Rabbi Yossi Haglili. Also, this is all the Gemara, by the way, in Sota 44a. Rashi's quoting, and he says, Rabbi Yossi Haglili Omer Hayare me'averot shebiyado. What's he afraid of? He's afraid of his sins. Remember, we believe that H-Shem protects us. H-Shem is always watching over all of us. But if you're in a dangerous situation, that's when you really need to step up and be very confident about your religiosity, about your holiness. And here, if you're afraid that you've slipped, that you're afraid you've made mistakes, then you don't know if Hashem is going to protect you anymore. You've lost that. And that's what you're afraid of. It says, Rashi continues, and that's why the Torah first introduces, like I said before, that if you married somebody and didn't sleep with her, you built a house, you didn't live in it yet, you grew a garden and you didn't harvest it yet. All of those things are just excuses so people could leave and not have to be embarrassed that they're sinners. Right? Because imagine if the officer would have just said, all of you who are afraid, you can leave. And you'd have people who are like, maybe were afraid, but would be too embarrassed to leave, knowing that his friends all know that he's messed up somehow. He's misnamed Cholent. Whatever his big sin was. So to avoid that, it came up with the Torah comes up with the system of all kinds of other excuses you could have to get out of battle first. The Gemara in Menachot says a fascinating thing. Now, this is, by the way, brought down in Halacha, and yeah. Oh, we have just a little time, so we're going to try to speed things up a little bit. The Gemara said there's a halacha that when men put on tefillin in the morning, there are two tefillin. There's a tefillin of the arm and there's a tefillin of the head. Now, they strap it on to your arm and then you put it onto your head. How many brachot are you supposed to say when you do this mitzvah? Is it one mitzvah or is it two? So there's an argument about it in the Talmud in Menachot about how many mitzvot you're doing. And it says here, Abai the Abai and Rava both said, Lo sach mevarich achat. If he did not speak in between, he only has to make one blessing, because it's then one mitzvah. Sach, if he spoke in between, then he separated the two mitzvot. If they separated the one mitzvah into two mitzvot, mevarich shtayim, only then does he have to say two brachot. Happens to be that, just so you know, just the final halacha, just for those of you who are curious, final halacha is that for Ashkenazim say two brachot all the time, the second one quietly, interestingly enough, and Sephardim say only one bracha when they put on tefillin, for this reason. Unless they spoke in between, in which case they have to follow this Gemara and say two brachot, like Ashkenazim do all the time. Anyway, so it says here, Sach ben tefillah letefillah. If somebody speaks between tefillot, averahi biyado. He has done a great sin. He has a sin in his hand. V'chozer alecha me'arche ha'milchama. And he's one of the people who has to go back in the time of war. What does that mean? Has to go back in time of war? What we just talked about, these soldiers who are afraid that Hashem is not protecting them because they have sinned. This is a sin that's big enough that they would have to go back in this time of war. What's so big about talking between tefillin? It's just talking. You put on your arm tefillin. By the way, this is typical morning, whatever it is, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock, whatever you're putting on tefillin, and your buddy comes in while you're putting on tefillin. You're tempted to say, "Hey, good morning. Hey, you didn't tuck in your shirt," or something. Right? I haven't seen you since last night. So, you might be tempted to speak. So what's so bad about that? Why would that be a big enough reason that you'd go back and avoid, be afraid of your midot? You'd be afraid of your possible sins, that you're so afraid that you'd have to go back in time of war. So there are a number of opinions. So first of all, the Rosh says tefillin are a very powerful mitzvah. It's one of the 613. All mitzvot are powerful. Tefillin are one of the things that help us prevail in war, make us successful in war. So you need to respect them. And if you're speaking in between the mitzvah, you're not respecting the mitzvah, and that's a big sin. Another idea is that the yad and the rosh, the head and the arm tefillin, are supposed to be united. They're supposed to be united in purpose. Your arm represents what you do, and your head represents what you think. So the thinking and the actions are supposed to be united. By speaking in between, you're basically saying perhaps religion, perhaps activities, perhaps your relationships are separate in your actions and how you feel about them. You want to be a hypocrite, right? That's the definition. So that's another opinion. There are deeper opinions. The Vilna Gaon talks about how concentration and focus are very important. And on that subject, the Michtav Mi'Eliyahu, Rav Eliyahu Dessler writes that somebody is supposed to be meticulous when it comes to mitzvot. You're supposed to be thinking about what they mean. Mitzvot aren't supposed to be just actions, just random things you're doing. Mitzvot are supposed to inspire you, supposed to be inspire your behavior. And if you have, and you're supposed to have what's called, he calls it, what does he call it? Um, It calls it hasach halev. You're supposed to have your heart is supposed to be into what you're doing. Your actions and your feelings again are supposed to be united in that sense. And if you can't be united in the 30 seconds it takes between putting on your arm tefillin and your head tefillin, then you're not really concentrating on the God that you're supposed to be loving by doing this particular mitzvah. This is a mitzvah of love, by the way. We even say verses about how much we love Hashem when we're putting him on. So you're marrying yourself to Hashem by putting it on your arm, right? So there's a symbolism of a ring. There's a lot going on when you're putting on tefillin. And if you don't have that, if you're just saying it, if you're just giving it, lip service, this love, and you don't actually have it, it's a big problem, and that is good reason to have to go back in times of war and feel that maybe Hashem's not going to protect you. All right, last piece here. We have about 5 minutes. We're going to do our best to try to give it enough oomph. Exactly. The last piece in the Torah here talks about something called an egla arufa. An egla arufa it's a whole. It's basically how ancient Israel dealt with murder mysteries. What happened was they found a dead body outside of a city somewhere, and what they did was they measured the body to the closest city. They would take a measurement of to the closest city to see where most likely he came from. So if somebody dies like that, if somebody's killed, it's not just a dead body, it's a murdered body. It's clearly a murder victim. If somebody's murdered like that, it probably means that they were not properly escorted. When somebody leaves, if an individual leaves our town, how are they leaving alone, and how are they in danger? How is somebody able to just kill them without any repercussions, without us knowing who did it or anything? No witnesses, no. Where were we? Why weren't we watching this person? So for that reason, the Torah has a whole system where the elders of a town closest to the murder victim need to sort of expiate their sins. They need to wash themselves clean, literally, of what happened. There's also an opinion, a more Kabbalistic opinion, by the way, that in part of the process is this thing called an egla arufa, where a heifer that has never been worked, a young cow, is killed, and its blood is basically poured onto that area where the murder victim was. There's a Kabbalistic opinion, I think this foreigner writes this, I'm not sure now, that the blood would miraculously then travel and basically point towards where the killer was. Basically, would actually then roll down to where the killer was, and that would help the investigators find the killer. Of course, I'm not sure if they can use that as evidence, but it must have left quite an impact. Imagine you've got like this trail of blood that's following you everywhere you go. So this animal, as I said, had to be a heifer, had to be unworked. So it's an interesting word that's used here. Let's look at chapter 21, verse 3. Vayaha'ir hakrova et hachalal, the city that was closest to this dead body. V'lakhu ziknei ha'ir, the elders of that town would take egla bakar, a young heifer, asher lo ubad, that has, lo ubad bo. Not usually the word here would be oved bo, by the way. Oved means worked. So here it actually means something different. It means that not that it has not been worked, which is how the Safari translate, but it hasn't been worked with. It's different. You'll see why in a moment, right? Lo mashcha ba'ol, and it never pulled a yoke. Okay, it never worked. So there's a Gemara in Bava Metzia where they ask the question that if why in this case, does it use the word ubad, shani hatam? The last line there of the Gemara that I brought there in chapter, again, this Gemara above Mitzvah 30a, Damar Kra Asher Lo Ubad Ba Mikol Makom. So there's this idea that ubad doesn't mean, like I said, an animal that has been worked, an animal that has been worked with, which means the difference between passive and active language. So in this case, what it means is that by this strange spelling makes it the ubad instead of oved, makes it passive, which indicates that the owner is satisfied with the result. Not necessarily that he intentionally did something, but something happened to the animal that is good for the owner. And by being passive about it, that's why the word ubad is being used. What I want to point out here is that the Torah, by the way, the spelling is oved. How do we know that it's ubad? And this brings us back to the whole theme of this parsha, and that is we know that it's ubad only because of our tradition. How is our tradition passed down? By our rabbis, right? So in other words, our sages who've been passing down our Masorah are the reason that we know that what's ubad and what's oved, right? And in this particular case, we've got this idea that it needs to be ubad, it needs to be passive because it's good for the owner one way or the other.
Pronunciation has to be oral tradition as well.
It has to be the pronunciation of everything, right? The famous story that I like to tell so much. One of my favorite stories in the Gemara is about the convert who comes to Hillel and asks to learn the Torah, but doesn't want the oral Torah. He just wants the written Torah. So Hillel, being the Hillel that we know, and it's a good way to end this story. Hillel says, "Sure, I'll teach you the written Torah. Let's start with obviously, if you're going to learn the written Torah, you need to learn the Aleph bet. So let's learn the letter Aleph." So he says Aleph. He writes it on the board. That's an Aleph. He says Aleph, write it 100 times. Aleph, 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 Aleph. Pronounce it. What's it called? Aleph. He quizzes him. He says, "Okay, next day we're going to learn the next letter." Next day comes in. The letter is bet. Bet, right? No, bet. He knows Aleph. This student is an expert in Aleph. Right now, we're going to make him an expert in bet. So what's this? It's a bet. What's this? It's an Aleph. Okay, Aleph bet. Good job. Bet. Write it 100 times. How do you pronounce it? What does it look like? Bet. Buy it. Okay, all this stuff. He's got it. No problem. What's the gematria? 2. Okay, very good. He knows bet. Third day, he shows up for a class, and Hillel says to him, today is a good day for a test. Let's do a quiz, pop quiz. He shows him an Aleph. He says, "What letter is this?" And the ger, he's very proud of himself. I got this. Aleph. Wrong. Shows him a bet. What's this? That's a bet. No, it's an Aleph. What do you mean? Yesterday you said it was an Aleph. You said this is a bet. How do you... He says exactly the point. You can't even do the written law without somebody telling you orally what the letters are. There is no such thing as the written law without the oral law. None of it makes sense at all. Without Rashi, without commentary, without the vowels that come to us through our oral tradition. We have no idea what Bereshit means. We can't start with anything. We can't even read the word Bereshit. We don't know. We don't know the Bereshit starts with a bet. We don't know anything without the oral law, and that's again a very important theme throughout Shoftim is that we go to the leaders that we have in our day because we want a tradition that's steeped in ancient thought that comes all the way back to H-Shem and is blessed with the siyata d'shmaya that we talked about. This blessing of H-Shem wanting us to do the right thing. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you have a good rest of your week.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Thank you, Yeshkoach.
Watch the mystery movie tonight.
We're watching.
You heard that guy?
Who?
Anthony